Hello, my friends. D.L. Anderson here. Welcome back to Transformation by Truth podcast as we share the truth concerning these last days and what you must do to save yourself from the violent times that are just ahead. Today's podcast is a word of truth accounting of the end times. The end is coming. The end is near. Today's podcast is entitled End Times 645 Reigning Over Ignorance and Deception, Part 5. The primary illustrations of acceptance and knowledge, the key that unlocks the door to receiving the will of Elohim. The podcast objectives are reveal why acceptance should not be complicated, reveal the great dilemma of acceptance, analyze the levels of acceptance, and reveal the primary illustrations of acceptance and knowledge. Welcome. Now, before we begin today's lesson, I would like to welcome all my beloved brothers and sisters in Yahushua Messiah who have been scattered to the four corners of the earth, who Yahuwah has joined to this ministry for such a time as this. I would also like to welcome anyone who is engaging our podcast or videos for the first time. We trust you were led by the set apart spirit in finding us. And if you continue to be led, we hope you stay with us. For these are troubling times, and an evil day is just ahead. To this end, if you are watching this video on YouTube and you have not subscribed to our channel, click the subscribe button below, and you will be alerted whenever we post new videos. Also, if you have any questions at the conclusion of this video, you can ask them using the link in the podcast description below the video player. Last but not least, if you like the video, please give it a thumbs up so YouTube can share it with believers like us. The simplest degree of knowledge. Shalom, my beloved brothers and sisters, and welcome to day 661 of our exposition of lawlessness. In the most recent podcast, we analyze the process in which understanding defeats misunderstanding and reasonable doubt. Not only this, but we also revealed the primary illustration of understanding in your quest. Enter a prosecutor, but not just any prosecutor. To wit, he is the only prosecutor who can get you a conviction in the court of spiritual law. Here again, a conviction means that Yahuwah agrees with your prayer, and thus he will answer your prayer. For as you were consistent and progressive in prayer, Yahuwah saw that you were convicted, and thus your prayer was effected. Praise Yah. Now, although understanding gets you a conviction, there is one final key to receiving the will of Elohim. And at this juncture, it should be the simplest degree of knowledge to unlock if you are good at spiritual mathematics. Now, as you have learned, consideration plus understanding equals acceptance. And seeing as we have already unlocked the power of consideration and understanding, acceptance should be automatic if you are following the linear model of holiness. Nevertheless, and knowing what is at stake at this interval, we must take a close look at the interval in between, obtaining a conviction in the court of spiritual law, and receiving the will of Elohim. In doing so, we will come to see the primary illustration of acceptance and the primary illustration of knowledge. Let's get started. The great dilemma of acceptance. Now, as simple as acceptance is to understand, it will yet be a difficult enterprise for you to enact. And this should be expected due to the difficulty involved in unlocking the powers of consideration and understanding. Not only this, but acceptance is designed to eliminate the ruach of denial and delusion from your mind, specifically denial. For as denial is the invading army, he is the bigger issue. For where there is no denial, there can be no delusion. Now, this should be clear by the recap you see in the table to the right. The primary objective of acceptance is to eliminate every potential breaking point in our lives by holding fast to the truth. And by definition, to accept is the act of taking or receiving something offered, reception, approval, or favor, the act of assenting or believing. Now, there are many keys in this summary. First and foremost, the prime objective of acceptance is to eliminate every potential breaking point in our lives by holding fast to the truth. This is a key matter which reveals the following. If you fail to hold fast to the truth, then you will at some point deny the truth. And where there is denial, there can be no acceptance. Now, here lies the problem. To wit, acceptance is the act of taking or receiving something offered. My dear friends, Yahuwah is offering you everlasting life. Not only this, but he is also offering you a secure path into the kingdom of his dear son, in a renewed earth where there will be 1,000 years of peace and goodwill toward the remnant of man. As I say, Yahuwah is ready and willing to do many great works on behalf of his set apart ones in these last days. And yet, the majority within this nation are not willing to accept these greater works. Here is why. Acceptance is not only the act of receiving, quite the contrary. Acceptance is also the act of assenting. Now, along these lines, one must assent to the requirements and the guidelines upon that which they are receiving. It's like a trust. To wit, the assets belong to you, but you must abide by the conditions of the trust. Here lies the problem and the great dilemma of acceptance. And as it is so crucial, I will offer it as a revelation. Consider this, my friends, and be advised. The majority are ready and willing to receive, but they are unready and unwilling to assent. To wit, they desire to receive many good things from the Most High Elohim, but they have no desire to follow the path to obtaining many good things from the Most High Elohim. For this path is straight and narrow and hard pressed, and there are few who will find it. Now, we have touched on this matter in prior podcasts, to wit, the delusion that you can get something for nothing and the persistent assault against the spiritual law of reaping and sowing, two fallacies which make the path to acceptance harder. Now, that said, the question we should chiefly entertain is this: how do you keep it simple? Trust me, even the most ardent believers will underestimate the difficulty in acceptance, and many ardent believers will make their way harder. And thus, I ask again, how do we keep this relatively straightforward degree of knowledge relatively straightforward? The answer is sure, and we analyzed it in a prior podcast. Vis-a-vis, you must deny yourself, or you will be deceived into denying Elohim. My dear friends, this is the great dilemma of acceptance. To wit, it is impossible for everyone to get what they want this time. For this is one occasion where someone will not get a bite of the apple. Ergo, someone will be denied. Remember, the goal of wisdom and knowledge is to merge your will with the will of Elohim. And if you know anything about mergers and acquisitions, then you know that the company being acquired does not dictate the terms of the merger. In like manner, your merger with the will of Elohim is not a force fit. To wit, you can't force Yahuwah's will to merge with your depraved spiritual standards. Quite the contrary, you must elevate your will to meet his superior spiritual standards. Facts. And the elevation of your will to meet his spiritual standard requires you to relinquish every facet of your will that is not aligned with his will. And this requires you to walk in the ways of self denial. For you can only walk in acceptance if the ruach of self is persistently denied. For the conflict between the ruach of self and the will of Elohim is the only dilemma that could arise. Levels of acceptance. Now, the good news is that you have already defeated denial and delusion in spiritual battle. Ergo, this is more of a matter of maintenance and understanding the vast importance of reigning over these degrees of lawlessness. Not only this, but the key to reigning over denial and delusion lies in understanding the mental environment at this interval. And if you don't recall, allow me to refresh your memory with the following treasure box. Acceptance does not transpire once you achieve full understanding. Quite the contrary, acceptance transpires in a mental environment where you still, to some degree, lack understanding. Now, this is why I have constantly stated that there is a bridge in between understanding and acceptance. It is because you are being commanded to accept the will of Elohim, even though you don't completely understand it. Here lies the problem, and why many will not make the leap from understanding to acceptance, even though the leap is straightforward. Vis-a-vis, it is because there are levels of acceptance, and at a high level, there are three levels. Now, the first level is classic. Enter forced acceptance. That is the occasion where one is accepting Yahuwah's will with a faulty perspective. For as they never came to agree with Yahuwah's will, the merger is forced. Here lies the problem. And I'll say it again. A merger is not a force fit. To wit, even in the secular world, there are rules governing the process of mergers to ensure that all parties agree to the conditions of the merger. Ergo, if all parties fail to agree upon the conditions, then the party that was forced will have a faulty perspective concerning the merger, which will prevent them from achieving acceptance. For your perspective is the primary driver of your acceptance. Now, this brings us to the second level of acceptance, which is also classic. Enter conditional acceptance. That is the occasion of one accepting Yahuwah's will on the condition that it appears to be in their favor. Ergo, those who prescribe to this model of acceptance are declaring, I can agree with Elohim if Elohim agrees with me. What fools! Look here. There are no negotiations concerning the conditions upon Yahuwah's will. As the saying goes, it is what it is. And yet, at this interval, we will never completely understand what it is. Ergo, if you are only willing to accept Yahuwah's will, if it meets your standard, then you are never going to accept Yahuwah's will because his will is never going to meet your standard. For look, listen, it has been written, my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares Yahuwah. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. No doubt, these verses speak to the gap between understanding and acceptance, and you will never bridge this gap via conditional acceptance. Now, this brings us to the third and final level of acceptance, and the only level that can unlock the door to receiving the will of Elohim. Enter blind and unconditional acceptance. Here is what this means. Blind and unconditional acceptance is accepting Yahuwah's will despite your lack of understanding and regardless of the conditions. Now, it should be clear that this is the only level of acceptance that will allow you to reign over denial and delusion. For this model of acceptance starts and ends with self-denial. Here lies the key. For self-denial will help you overcome the things you can't understand. And this will allow you to hold fast to your convictions to the point where his will be your command. Praise Yah. The primary illustrations of acceptance and knowledge. Now, the sum of these matters clearly reveals the primary illustrations of acceptance, and I alluded to it earlier in this podcast. Vis-a-vis, acceptance is a key, but not just any key. Rather, it is the key that opens the door to receiving the will of Elohim. We know this because you will never have complete understanding of Yahuwah's will before you receive his will. Ergo, even after you unlock the power of understanding, there is a door you must unlock to receive the will of Elohim, and acceptance is the key. Now, per our preferred example of spiritual court, your prosecutor, i.e., understanding, has the power to get you a conviction. However, the transaction of a conviction in spiritual court differs from secular court. Vis-a-vis, in secular court, the trial ends with the conviction, and the will of the court is transacted. And yet, this is not the case for the court of spiritual law. To wit, there is an interval in between a conviction and the transaction of the will of Elohim. Get this. Even if you obtain a conviction in spiritual court, the Most High Elohim must account you as worthy to receive his will. Now, that said, the question of the hour is quite simply this: what is the key to ensuring that you are counted worthy to receive the will of Elohim? The answer is sure. Acceptance is the key. To wit, Yahuwah will evaluate your levels of acceptance. For your levels of acceptance reveal the depth of your convictions. And as you have learned, the court of spiritual law begins and it ends with conviction. Now, this is why you must operate at the level of blind and unconditional acceptance. For Yahuwah will never count you worthy to receive his will if you are unwilling to accept his will blindly and without conditions. Trust me, it's a non-starter. Not only this, but the fact that you can get a conviction in spiritual court and not be worthy to receive the will of Elohim is a crucial reality that highlights the gap between understanding and acceptance, which reveals that the one who is not assenting is the one who is not receiving. Now, you can see this gap by analyzing the diagram below. To wit, your prosecutor of understanding is located on one side of the mental bridge of trust, and the door to knowledge is located on the other. And this is to be expected. Vis-a-vis, your understanding is aligned with your planning faculty. In effect, your prosecutor is planning to get a conviction in the spiritual court of prayer and law. And this requires you to open the door to knowledge. However, the door to knowledge is locked, for it is aligned with your execution faculty, which is aligned with the will of Elohim, which you believe, but you have yet to receive. And thus, you need the key, and acceptance is the key. As you can see, acceptance unlocks the door to knowledge, which allows you to receive the will of Elohim. And this, my friends, is the juncture where your conviction becomes your reality. As I say, the vision and the purpose Yahuwah has for you in your life will come to be. All you have to do is walk in acceptance, and as you assent, you will receive. Hallelujah. Now, here is the final word. The only way to see what he has in store is to secure the key and unlock the door. Brothers and sisters, hear me carefully as I say, we have analyzed many illustrations of holiness over the past 2 years, and we will analyze many more. But let me tell you something. The illustration of acceptance will always be one of the most critical features you ever obtain, and one of the more crucial in spiritual war. Trust me, the enemy knows that he cannot defeat you if you unlock the door to Yahuwah's will. And so he will do everything within his power to hide the key. But if you stay upon your convictions, you will increase your understanding. And as long as you assent, you will be worthy to receive. Heretofore, I recommend give all diligence to operate at the highest level of acceptance and accept his will no matter the cost. For if we fail to accept his will, then we cannot receive his will. And without his will, we will be lost. Now, here is today's assignment. Meditate on today's lesson. And if you have any questions, please submit them using the form at pinnacleofholiness.com. And I will respond to you as soon as I can. Now, here is what's next. We completed today's podcast, End Times 645, Reigning Over Ignorance and Deception, Part 5. And the next podcast is entitled Greater Works You Shall Do, Part 4. I will post this podcast on Friday, April 24th, 2026. Until then, my friends, continue to be led by the Spirit of Elohim. Continue to watch, continue to pray, continue in fasting, and most of all, continue to be focused, for the end is coming. The end is near.